Hey, what's up? It's Phoenix and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I encourage you to hit that like button, to subscribe for more quality content from Phoenix, and to share with your friends. I also encourage you to check out my books at my author page at amazon.com/author/phoenix_rises. I wanted to do a special episode today on some things that are going on in the world, specifically the pandemic. And I noticed that when I am in times of crisis, or high stress, or fear, or all of the above, that I do my best and even almost subconsciously or unconsciously make deeper connections on things that I normally wouldn't. And so, as I was thinking of the range of literature that I have read and that I wanted to read, while I was thinking about the pandemic, I thought of Daniel Defoe, who wrote Robinson Crusoe, but also who wrote Journal of the Plague Year. And the reason why this is important is because I wanted to continually search literature and philosophy and science and theology to be able to come up with conclusions about what is going on in the world right now with everything going on, and how we have been quarantined and how we've been, I would describe, have had our society disrupted. And I thought of this book, and I wanted to talk a little bit about some of my conclusions that I've drawn thus far. I don't consider myself to be an expert on anything, and I am not considering myself an expert on the pandemic, but what I do hope to utilize is wisdom found in books and found in a variety of sources to be able to come to some conclusions. And so I have come to some conclusions. This book is very interesting because it describes how there is an ebb and flow to nature, there is an ebb and flow to society, and I think this is something to keep in mind. We have had strains of deadly diseases before. We have had the Spanish flu, for instance, and this was back in 1918, and that did a lot of damage. But I would say 2 centuries ago, we wouldn't have thought that things would have been horrible in terms of a pandemic as an example, though there may have been similar things going on at the time, depending on where you're at in history and in time and in place. But the thing that was interesting to think about was that it's so easy for us to look at catastrophes and natural disasters and other things like that as being all-encompassing and being all that there is. But that is not necessarily true. History is huge. History is massive, and it encompasses so many eons and so many different things in life. And I think that it is important to keep in mind. And so I would describe this little video that I'm making now as being my own journal of the plague year, my own journal of 2020, and the plague year of 2020. And it's because I realize that there is an ebb and flow to how these things go. We will get through this. I really believe that we will get through this, and that we will have ways of pushing forward by way of our wisdom, by way of advancements in understanding and knowledge, and I think that this is very important to keep in mind. And so definitely Daniel Defoe is looking at this from a very micro perspective, from his perspective, but also from a macro perspective, and realizing that things pass. We can't often see the huge tides of history when we are in it, and this is understandable, but through time, by taking a more macro perspective, we can do our best to try to see that things are much more complicated, but in a beautiful way, in an open-ended way. And I think this is very important to keep in mind. Another thing that I was thinking about with Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe is basically how much his experiences and the things that he is describing in this book in the 1600s and 1700s were very similar to what we are experiencing now. There is definitely, interestingly enough, so many parallels with people quarantining themselves, with businesses closing, with things feeling very on edge, and with us feeling tense, and all of these things that we are experiencing, and how sometimes we resort to apocalyptic explanations, such as God's wrath, or trying to use astrology to be able to explain things. And while I understand that some of these things would be utilized out of desperation, I also feel that there is much more to it, and I think this is important to keep in mind. These things don't have to be apocalyptic. They are very traumatizing, I would describe, as mass traumas in these kinds of things, and it's very hard to keep a cool and level head. But I think that that's something that Daniel Defoe thinks that we should do, at least in terms of thinking about the macro. Obviously, these things are complicated, and I have noticed that I've been spooked by the closed buildings surrounding us in our city, and I've been spooked by a lot of the things that we are experiencing now with less people out, with the self-quarantine, with people being afraid, and all of this is very valid to consider. But I also realize that, again, it's a macro perspective. In what ways do things ebb and flow? In what ways do things change through time? I don't believe that this has to be the end of the world, that this has to be an apocalypse. I think we will get through this. And again, while I'm not an expert on these things, I'm trying to approach it from the macro perspective of crisis and catastrophe, where certainly things are complicated and we don't always know what's going on, but in a way we've never always been certain about things either, and how that happens in life. How we're not always sure what's going on and things are always a little bit unstable in some way. So I'm Phoenix, and I definitely encourage you to pick up a copy of this book or to find it for free on Project Gutenberg, which I encourage you to check out, and where you can download the ebook for free. And I encourage you to meditate on some of these things and to think about the Journal of the Plague Year and your Journal of the Plague Year and what you are experiencing in this encounter with nature. But I would say, try not to be afraid. We're all in this together. We've all got each other. And let's do our best to make this year 2020 the best that it can be. I'm Phoenix, and thank you for watching, and there will be much more content to come, so definitely keep a lookout. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.